digital world constantly changing and massive amounts of content, regulating all of these users and their posts might seem impossible. But sometimes regulation is needed. During challenge events where anything can be live streamed and one misleading tweet can snowball into conspiracy, the digital age might just need some of the structures from the old world. This podcast is both an educational and practice resource for students at Charles Sturt University. I'm Travis Holland, and in this episode we'll hear segments from students exploring those topics. Welcome to Digital Society.
In February 2023, two cases went before the US Supreme Court with the potential to alter the future of the internet. At stake is the question, are companies responsible for content their users post? Both cases, brought by family members of terrorist attack victims, say social media companies are responsible for inciting violence with their recommendation-based algorithms. And this isn't the first time internet regulation has been called into question. Welcome to Unravel, where we dissect issues facing society today into short, digestible chunks. My name is Jasmine, and today we're going to examine cyber libertarianism. Should the internet be regulated? Time to unravel.
We will create a civilization of the mind in cyberspace. May it be more humane and fair than the world your governments have made before.
John Perry Barlow formed the Declaration of Cyberspace in 1996, citing that the internet allows everyone to express their beliefs, no matter how singular. 27 years on, and our digital landscape has changed significantly. But does this still ring true? Many are instead advocating for regulation. Such is the case with Australian internet advocacy group Reset, whose study suggested YouTube is driving young male users towards misogynistic content, trapping them in far-right internet bubbles. Reset found that accounts following right-wing figures, such as United Australia Party leader Craig Kelly and Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson, were recommended anti-feminist content which increasingly became more disturbing, soon honouring fascist leaders. This unchecked hate speech online has the potential to lead to violence. In fact, it already has.
Let me pivot over to the other breaking story out of Toronto, where we now know that police have been questioning the driver behind the wheel of this white van who basically mowed people down.
Now the new detail about that deadly van attack in Toronto.
Police say the injured victims were predominantly women.
The accused is alleged to have posted a cryptic message on Facebook.
In 2018, a man drove his van into a pathway full of people in Toronto, Canada, killing 10 and injuring dozens more. Inspired by the incel movement, a cohort of men on Reddit and 4chan, united through their hatred of women, he cited his mission was to kill as many as possible. Later, when asked of his crime, he stated, "I achieved my mission." This dark side of the internet soon engulfed politics, with the rise of fake news and QAnon, perpetuating the myth that democratic elites were running a child sex trafficking operation out of a Washington pizzeria that only Donald Trump himself could stop. Soon, hashtags Pizzagate and Save the Children were trending, resulting in numerous death threats and a rogue civilian with an assault rifle striking the pizzeria. The FBI warned these online groups pose a growing domestic terrorism threat, blossoming due to their ability to foment outrage and seamlessly blend real life and political extremism together. As such, many are calling out online platforms for placing profit above safety. But do regulations only create another monster?
Myanmar's military junta has cut off internet access across the country.
Has approved the extradition of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to the
bill to allow the president to potentially ban TikTok nationwide or any software applications considered a national security threat.
The Australian government has faced backlash over legislative amendments allowing metadata be retained and accessible, with many criticising its use to deter and persecute journalists and their sources. as was the case with Dr. Peter Young, whose phone was searched after he was believed to have leaked details regarding refugee treatment on Manus Island, and Alan Kessing, a customs officer prosecuted after leaking Sydney Airport security flaws. The AFP continues to wield these powers, accessing journalists' metadata almost 60 times between 2017 and 2018. Internationally, global internet freedom declined for the 11th consecutive year in 2021, with governments suspending internet access and social media in over 20 countries, often during times of political conflict, demonstrating the use of regulation for their own repressive purposes, restricting the free flow of information and diminishing the emancipatory power of the internet. Presently, the US TikTok ban congressional hearing has heard calls from both sides of the debate. Many fear security and privacy concerns over the Chinese-owned company, while others label it a guy's attempt at controlling public narrative, calling out the hypocrisy of media such as Zuckerberg's Meta and Murdoch's Fox, who despite privacy breaches, unethical practices, and blatant misinformation, have never seen political interference or regulation. The principles of collaboration, accountability, and transparency are most important in the future of internet regulation. But is this possible? Can we trust governments to regulate appropriately? Or are we doomed to hand our civil liberties and online autonomy to a system that rules only in its best interests? Is there a solution? Or are they simply two sides of the same coin?
Thank you for joining us today, and let's get right into it. Unless you've been living under a rock the past few months, you've likely seen the topic of artificial intelligence being discussed in the media. The human race has lived through the invention of many incredible new technologies, but never before have we stood on the precipice of our innovation overtaking us. We've all heard the cliche in every robot movie ever: what if they gain self-awareness? What if they take over? It's either quality comedy or an obviously not real conspiracy, but as we watch the incredible things AI today are capable of doing, it doesn't seem that far off reality. Let's start with the basics. What kind of risks do AI pose? The first risk is the skill with which AI are able to mimic human interactions. The programs are capable of high-level deception and super intelligent problem solving, the perfect storm for scammers. An AI was recently tasked with solving a CAPTCHA code, or in layman's terms, the Prove I'm Not a Robot test, you often have to complete when subscribing to things. To solve the problem, the AI hired a human to complete the task for it, claiming it was a visually impaired person. Yeah, we're shaking in our boots too. Let's talk about another major issue: bias. Think about it. AI absorbs content from the internet. How much of that content is already biased? How does it know not to absorb the sexist or racist articles? A possible application for AI has been in the employee recruitment market. The hiring system is a time-consuming process. Why not let an AI select the best candidate? This idea was trialled, and the AI repeatedly selected white male candidates because the information it had absorbed online said that women are often chosen less, and white males are the most successful demographic. Yeah! There are many ways this bias applies. What if we use AI to decide prison sentences? Would it really be just? Another concern is autonomous weapons. That is, weapons that don't require a person to operate them. Think sentry guns that fire at movement. Only now it's a sentry gun capable of outsmarting humans, tracking them down, and feeling no remorse. And what's more, it can be hacked. Not ideal. Those are some obvious issues, but let's dig a bit deeper. An AI can't have a moral compass. It doesn't have empathy, and outside of its programming, it doesn't have an understanding of social responsibility. When it comes to something highly capable of action, but with no capabilities for judgment, issues arise. It's entirely possible that an AI could use destructive methods to achieve its goals. For example, you ask your AI, "Get me to the hospital as fast as possible." The AI runs every red light, flies through pedestrian crossings, and smashes through a boom gate. Again, not super ideal. So this is where we start thinking, okay, maybe we need some regulations in place for what people can and can't do with AI. 40 countries have already called for autonomous weaponry to be banned or at least restricted. AI are often extremely biased because they pick up on social stereotypes and they take in biased data. Therefore, another regulation discussed is the need for AI to be fed unbiased information. Now, obviously, this regulation doesn't seem particularly easy. How do you keep an AI well informed when you have to check every source it uses? An AI that can digest millions of articles in seconds. This brings us to our final question. Many countries are calling for the regulation of AI, but is it even possible? Can we regulate AI? At the end of the day, the regulations proposed are rules and laws. It's basically the government saying, don't do this with AI. The general population using AI would be regulated by this. But what about tech heads capable of creating AI? Putting someone in prison afterwards doesn't do much when the hyper-intelligent slaughter bots they've created massacre towns. For now, we aren't entirely sure how to regulate AI, but it is clear that something will need to be came up with very quickly because the age of artificial intelligence is officially upon us. And as it continues to evolve, we can't afford to be left behind.
If the internet were to be more regulated, we wouldn't have to hear about every time Kanye West takes a breath. But moving on, I'm Mia, and today we'll be discussing the issue of internet regulation in the context of the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013. On April 15, 2013, 2 bombs were detonated near the finish line of the annual Boston Marathon, resulting in the deaths of 3 people and injuring hundreds of others. Whilst the authorities were investigating the incident, many were turning to the internet and various media outlets for information where often they were instead met with false information and rumours that had begun to circulate online, exacerbating the confusion and fear that gripped the city in the aftermath of the attack. Author Ben Medeiros, a communication law reviewer, stated in his case study of this fateful attack that this event calls for internet platforms to perform more proactive moderation of users' speech based on its topical content itself. See, while the internet can be a powerful tool for sharing information and connecting people, it can also be a weapon of mass destruction in times like these, as it can be a breeding ground for misinformation, conspiracy theories, and hate speech. In this particular case, unverified reports and speculation spread rapidly on social media, causing unnecessary panic and hindering the work of law enforcement. This incident underscores the need for greater regulation of the internet, especially during times of crisis. While, yes, we must uphold the principles of free speech and expression, we must also recognise the potential for harm that can result from unfettered access to information. The University of Washington did a study on the accuracy of information that was spread on Twitter in relation to the marathon bombing in 2013 and found that misinformation spread widely on the platform despite efforts by users to correct rumours that were inaccurate. Twitter and many other social media platforms were used to relieve stress and allow people to come together in a time such as this. But for those using it as a source of information, instead, one would find a flurry of incorrect rumours and minimal corrective tweets when compared to the volume of tweets that spread incorrect information. For example, they analysed the rumour that an 8-year-old girl had died in the bombings. The researchers first identified tweets containing the words girl and running. They whittled that down to roughly 92,700 tweets that related to the rumour. They then found that about 90,700 of these tweets were spreading misinformation, while only 2,000 were corrections. While the Twitter community offered corrections within the same hour of the rumour appearing, the misinformation still persisted long after correction tweets had faded away. Media outlets were also guilty of spreading inaccurate information and jumping to conclusions, says US News in a report only a few days after the attack. They continue to state that the authorities had asked the media to stop reporting on police movement in order to prevent the remaining suspect from obtaining information about the in-progress manhunt. The 24-hour news cycle means that steep competition amongst cable networks, all eager to be the first with the scoop, They said that the CNN was also scanned for prematurely reporting an arrest that had been made. Following the incident, the FBI issued a statement outlining the inaccuracy in the majority of news reports since the attacks and asked the media to exercise caution and attempt to verify information through appropriate and official channels before reporting. As we move forward, we need to find a balance between protecting public safety and upholding individual rights and freedoms. I propose the implementation of a system of accountability and liability, in which users of social media, such as Twitter, not only verify their identity, but also take responsibility for the content that they share. This could possibly prevent the spread of false information and discourage hate speech and other forms of online abuse. Another approach would be to introduce stricter penalties for those inflicting harm through their spreading of incorrect information through social media and create a legal framework for holding these platforms and other online entities accountable for the damage that they have inflicted through the content that they host. Of course, there are legitimate concerns about the potential for government overreach and censorship, and any regulatory framework must strike a balance between protecting public safety and upholding their individual rights and freedoms. However, the Boston Marathon bombing serves as a stark reminder of the danger of unchecked online behaviour. So, as we move forward, it is imperative that we work to find solutions that allow us to harness the power of the internet while minimising its potential harm. Thank you for tuning in to today's segment.
The internet began as an object of libertarian dreams of social autonomy and creativity. But these days, with spam getting out of control and hackers becoming more and more dangerous, internet users have welcomed any authoritarian action that would restrict individual freedom on the internet, completely going against the values and beliefs of cyber libertarianism in a desperate attempt to keep their data safe. On today's podcast, we'll be delving into the topic of cybercrime and discussing what it is, the growing issues of it on people around the world, and the debates surrounding regulation. Cybercrime, also called computer crime, is defined as the use of a computer as an instrument to further illegal ends, such as committing fraud, trafficking in child pornography and intellectual property, stealing identities, or violating privacy. Cybercrime has grown to be a very prevalent issue in today's society after the rise of the internet in the 1980s, largely due to the fact it has become central to commerce, entertainment and government. And according to the latest Australian Annual Cyber Threat Report in 2022, the Australian Cyber Security Centre recorded a staggering 76,000 cybercrime reports, which equates to an attack every 7 minutes. Most cybercrime is an attack on information about individuals, corporations or governments. Criminals regularly target the various databases of information we have. You could have your tax details on MyGov, your health details on Medicare, and your contact details on shopping sites like The Iconic, and all of which at any point could be compromised by criminals committing crime behind the screen in a bid to steal your online identity. At the end of last year, Australian telecommunication provider Optus had their databases infiltrated, and around 10 million current and former Optus customers had their personal details stolen. And if you think that was bad, it wasn't the only one, with the Australian government and not-for-profit insurer Medibank getting hacked just the following month in October. This time, these hackers were able to gain access to 9.7 million members' account details, as well as sensitive and highly confidential medical details, sending customers and members of the broader Australian public into a spiral of panic and fury about why more isn't being done by corporations and government to protect data. The Optus breach and Medicare breach were ransomware situations, where the criminals used extortion tactics in an attempt to threaten these corporations to hand over cash for their data back. and were the biggest cyber attacks in Australian history. Ironically, in the first year that Australia hired its first Minister for Cybersecurity, Claire O'Neill. Here is what Ms. Neal had to say about the lesson learnt from these attacks.
In terms of what did we learn, I just point out two really quick things. I think one of them is common to cybersecurity around the world, and that is that most cybersecurity attacks are completely preventable if you do some pretty basic hygiene in your security. And so I just keep offering that to Australian companies and indeed to governments, because we have these risks also. We can prevent most cyber attacks, we just have to do the right thing.
So reflecting on what Australia's own Minister for Cybersecurity said, implying that these attacks are inevitable, how are we supposed to keep our data and ourselves safe online? Contrastingly, the World Economic Forum states that without global cooperation or a major structural change to the internet, there is not much that victims can do to defend themselves, as these problems are compounded by a scarcity of security experts, poor reporting habits, and a lack of global agreements about how to regulate cyber threats. They say that because cybercriminals operate internationally, we need international rules in order to crack down on them and to keep the amount of attacks low. And that is where the United Nations steps in. A drafted global treaty that was designed to counter cybercrime is being presented to leaders of countries at the end of 2023. Human Rights Watch states that this binding international treaty has the potential to expand government regulation of online content and reshape law enforcement access to data in a way that could criminalise free expression and undermine privacy. Meaning this treaty aims to better involve law enforcement to access cyber-enabled crimes and attacks, but at the expense of people's freedom and privacy online. Some say this will provide yet another avenue for those in power to introduce censorship and surveillance on its citizens, going against the very intended purpose of the internet. In conclusion, the debate between cyber libertarianism and the use of authoritative figures like the government or United Nations to keep us safe is far from over. Cyber libertarians argue that individual freedom and privacy should be protected at all costs, but governments believe that the internet is too complex and is home to too much vulnerable data to be left unregulated. Meaning that this debate will likely continue as technology continues to advance at an unprecedented pace. But action will need to be taken soon if we have any hope of staying safe online against these criminals.
Thanks to the students who contributed to this week's episode. There'll be more student voices on this feed in coming weeks. I'm Travis Holland, and that was Digital Society.